Chapter 1. Jian Qin. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Within a seemingly endless chain of mountain ranges, there were two sword-shaped mountain peaks well over 1,000 feet tall and 100 meters apart from each other as it towered under the vast ocean of clouds. Both of these sword-shaped mountains were extremely precipitous and looked as if two gods had once stabbed their swords into the world. No matter where one looked, there was no way to climb up these mountains. At the very top of these peaks, there was only less than 100 meters between one peak to the next. There was a faint amount of fog that hampered the visibility of the area to a confusing degree. However, despite the hazy visibility, one would still be able to faintly make out two people standing at the very top of the mountain peaks calmly and motionlessly as if they were stone statues. Only their clothes and wind had fluttered with the fierce gale of wind that blew across the sky. Between these two people, one of them was a youth that was no older than 20 years old. This youth was incredibly handsome with a flawless facial appearances. It could be said that his appearances was simply unrivaled throughout the world and was a natural lady killer. His rather ordinary-looking eyes contained a unique amount of attractiveness and fascination to them and seemed as if it could steal the soul of whomever. The youth had long black hair with a length that reached his waist without being tied up in any way, allowing it to float freely in the fierce wind as if it was dancing. On his back was a single long sword that was wrapped up in a thick white layer of cloth. On the exquisite sword hilt that stuck out from the cloth, one could make out the two words, "Light Wind." What was most puzzling about the sword, however, was the fact that there had been no ropes binding it to the youth at all. It seemed as if it was stuck to the back of the youth without any chance of falling, clearly a very hard display to explain. This youth's name was Jian Qin, the #1 expert with a name that shook the heavens, and the Jianghu with the moniker of Sword God. His quick sword techniques had long since reached perfection and could be considered the sword master of the generation. Despite being only 20 or so years old, he had already reached a realm of great heights. The details regarding Jian Qin were relatively unknown to the people of the Jianghu. Aside from that he was an orphan with no affiliations to any school or sect, there was nothing else known about him. His history was essentially a riddle, and the strong style of martial arts and the exquisite sword style he used had been an utter mystery on where to learn it. And on the other sword-shaped peak 100 meters away was a single large man wearing black robes. This was an elderly man who looked to be around 50 to 60 years old with hair that was tied up in the same fashion of the neck of a crane. Both of his elderly eyes lit up with a lively spirit that seemed to shine with a light that lit up the entire area. His gaze had been like a sharp sword that would make anyone unwilling to look straight at him. In his hand was a black and thick long sword. But what was most surprising was that this giant sword had no edge to it. This elderly man was the legendary figure that had disappeared from the Jianghu over 100 years ago. Dugu Qiubai. But that was only a nickname of his, since no one had any idea on what his true name or identity was. The reason for this was because over 100 years ago, he had defeated every single, unparalleled, super experts. Nowadays, the amount of people that knew anything about Dugu Qiubai and were still alive were far and few. But even now, the splendid light he had cast in his former days had been passed on from generation to generation. 100 years later, his strength was surely much stronger than before, meaning that there was no one that knew just how strong Dugu Qiubai had become. Silently, Dugu Qiubai stared at the 20 or so years old Jian Qin from 100 meters away. His eyes were extremely terrifying and seemed to contain a sharp sword-like glare that seemed as if it could freeze someone at times. Jian Qin, despite being so young, you have a strength that is no weaker than mine. Your achievements in the way of the sword is something that even I can only hope to attain. But unfortunately, you've killed my one dear disciple, leaving me no choice but to take revenge. No matter what, I will act in place of my disciple for the sake of justice today. Dugu Qiubai spoke darkly. His previously calm voice had already started to fill up with a bloodlust that would cause people to tremble and shake. But Jian Qin's face remained calm as ever as he stared back at Dugu Qiubai impassively. His white robes fluttered gently into the air while the hair that dangled at his waist was sent dancing in the wind freely. I cannot be blamed for that. It was your disciple that decided to offend me first. It could only be blamed on his lack of skill that he was killed by my own sword. Jian Chen's lips opened and closed gently as the words came flowing out from his mouth. Laughing angrily, Dugu Qiubai spoke, a lack of skill. Very well then. Then today I will see just how experienced you are. Let this old man see where you will be able to execute me with your light wind sword. As he spoke, Dugu Qiubai waved his heavy iron sword. Immediately, a strong amount of sword chi began to escape the sword before shooting straight for Jian Chen 100 meters away with the speed of a lightning bolt. Unsheathing his sword with an impassive face, Jian Chen quickly drew out the long sword that had been on his back to his hand. This double-edged sword was about 1.3 meters long and 2 fingers wide with a white light. Stabbing forward with the sword, an even more fierce amount of sword chi appeared from the sword and shot towards the jet of sword chi from Dugu Qiubai with a speed almost impossible to see with the naked eye. Bang! The two rays of sword chi collided with a loud explosion that rocked the eardrums. A large wave of chi scattered away from the epicenter with great speeds, scattering the lingering wisp of mist and clouds nearby. Straight away, Jian Chen and Dugu Qiubai flew straight for each other, leaving the twin peaks they had initially been standing on. As they reached the midway point of the two peaks, they began to engage each in a fierce battle midair. The two men had strikes that were impeccably fast and the sounds made from their weapons striking against each other had been an endless stream of metallic rings. A sharp amount of sword chi shot out from all directions from the two and left giant holes in the landscape around them. As a result, countless of rocks had been sent cascading down 1,000 meters below. Within several breaths' worth of time, Jian Chen and Dugu Qiubai had already exchanged several hundred blows at lightning-quick speeds. Afterwards, the two men had leapt back to their respective mountain peaks. Each person were in a worse-for-wear state and had more than enough tears in their previously perfect clothing. With a serious expression that seemed to grow even more grim each second, Dugu Qiubai growled, "What a fast sword, it is no wonder that no one in the Jianghu is able to break past your sword. But, it is powerless against this old man." Dugu Qiubai paused for a moment before continuing to say, "If we continue on like this, the victor of this match will be hard to determine. We may as well use our strongest strike to find out the victor." With that, Dugu Qiubai suddenly exploded with power that seemed as if it was a single giant sword that pierced into the skies. Growing serious as well, Jian Chen too began to spike with a large amount of power that was by no means weaker than Dugu Qiubai. The power of the two men continued to escalate with an earth-shattering amount of force that filled the entire area. Soon enough, the power of the two began to cover the both of them and all over the entire mountains. Even the clouds themselves had a hole in them from the power exuded by the two. A fierce gale began to scream and whistle with an ear-piercing sound that was reminiscent of a ghost wailing into the winds. Down in the forests below, countless of animals began to let out terrified sounds as they began to scuttle away from the area as far as their limbs could take them. The strength of the two men on the peaks continued to escalate as they prepared to unleash their strongest strike. Kacha! Kacha! Not too far away in the mountains, several small trees were unable to withstand the power of the two. Snapping and breaking into several pieces, they were sent flying into the air and far away from the place. While Jian Chen and Dugu Qiubai's strength continued to rise, a stream of qi began to stream around them in a single revolution. Any trees or pieces of grass in the area had been pressed down against the ground in the face of their might, and several of the larger trees had even begun to shake back and forth. At the same time, a dazzling glow of white light appeared in Jian Chen's light wind sword while a jet-black light appeared in Dugu Qiubai's heavy iron sword. The qi circulating around the two men began to grow stronger and stronger until there was a rich white glow that surrounded Jian Chen completely, and a deep black glow that surrounded Dugu Qiubai inside. The both of them had disappeared into their respective colors, while all that was left to see was two balls of light shining with the exact opposite colors of each other. Jian Chen's light wind sword had already been filled with a resplendent glow and had started to shake with a powerful sword chi that would cause anyone to feel frightened. His black hair had fluttered crazily in the winds while the white robe he wore fluttered with it. His entire body floated in midair, and a single look was all it took for him to be identified as a war god with an indomitable strength. As the two men's strength continued to climb up to the peak, the two men suddenly let out a furious roar that shook the heavens like a bolt of lightning and pierced the eardrums. Straight away, a beautiful bright white light and a dark black light shot towards each other with incredible speed. In the instant where the two would collide against each other, there had been no sound as one would expect. When everything had calmed down, one could see that Jian Chen and Dugu Qiubai had changed spots. Each one were now on the other mountain peak away from each other with an equally pale face. A steady stream of blood could be seen flowing from Jian Chen's chest, staining his pure white robes instantly. In that split instance where the two sides had crossed paths, Dugu Qiubai's sword had pierced through Jian Chen's heart. As for Dugu Qiubai, he had lost his entire right arm, meaning that he would not be able to wield a sword any longer. The heavy iron sword that had been in it had long since dropped down 1,000 meters into the cliffs below. At the time where he had pierced Jian Chen's heart, he had lost his right arm in exchange. Standing silently on top of the mountain peak, a stream of fresh blood began to slowly leak from his mouth. His white face continued to grow paler and paler before it became as pale as paper. His heart had been pierced by Dugu Qiubai's sword, meaning that he was doomed to be stuck in an impasse where death was inevitable. Ha ha ha. Suddenly, Dugu Qiubai began to laugh from the mountain peak he was standing on. Jian Chen, with your talent, you would most likely be able to defeat me given several years. But how unfortunate it is for you that your strength is lacking from mine. In the end, you were still defeated by my hand. As he spoke, Dugu Qiubai sighed shortly. For an old man like me to see to the funeral of a genius, what a sorrowful matter. But however, I must do what I must to avenge my disciple. Sensing that he was slowly being cut away from the power of life, Jian Chen began to close his eyes. At that moment, he was at peace with himself. Death to him was no important matter. After all, after traveling so many years in the Jianghu, Jian Chen had killed many men and death had long since dulled his emotions. The only emotion he had felt in his heart was that he would have no more chances to explore the pinnacle of the way of the sword. Just as Jian Chen submitted himself to a realm of calm, a sudden but strange feeling appeared within Jian Chen's mind. In that crucial moment, Jian Chen's spirit seemed to have harmonized with his long sword. He was the sword, and the sword was him. There had been no difference between the two of them. It was almost as if the sword had already become a part of his soul. At the same time, a powerful and pure amount of world energy began to descend from the skies before flowing into his mind one stream after another. As it entered, it began to perfectly harmonize with his soul, and as the energy of the world continued to pour into him, Jian Chen could distinctly feel that his own spirit began to grow at an accelerated rate. Simultaneously, his soul began to leave his body and into the boundless mountains and fields ahead. At this very moment, everything within 5,000 meters could be distinctly seen in Jian Chen's mind. He could even see a single mosquito on the ground living as it pleased without a problem. At the verge of his death, he had somehow managed to break through. Chapter 2. Changyang Xiang Tian. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Suddenly, the sword in Jian Chen's hand started to control itself. It was as if the long sword had a mind of its own. Unexpectedly, the sword shot toward Dugu Qiubai like a bolt of lightning, traveling at a very high speed. The speed of the long sword was almost inconceivable. Dugu Qiubai only reacted when the sword had reached his throat. The sword was infused with an extraordinarily fierce sword chi. Dugu Qiubai widened his eyes in fear just as the long sword pierced through his neck. After finishing the strike, mist appeared from the hilt of the sword. The mist swirled around in midair momentarily before the sword returned to Jian Chen's hand. A fist-sized hole slowly appeared in the middle of Dugu Qiubai's throat. The sword tip had expanded as it pierced through Dugu Qiubai's neck, enlarging the wound. If not for that, it would have been impossible for a sword that thin to create a wound of that size. Dugu Qiubai's eyes were wide open as he stared at the sword, not believing what he saw. After all, he had just witnessed an impossible feat. He slowly opened his mouth to say something, but unfortunately, his throat had already been impaled, rendering him speechless. With a final look of disbelief and terror, he slowly crumpled to the floor, never to stand again. Jian Chen clasped his sword silently before looking at the collapsed Dugu Qiubai. A gasp was threatening to escape from his own mouth. He didn't think that in this final hour of life he would make a breakthrough into the realm of the sword god. But however, it was for naught, as he himself was close to death as well. Inwardly sighing, Jian Chen's eyes slowly began to dim. Even though the breakthrough empowered his body, it was very hard to escape death, especially when one's innards are skewered. Soon after, Jian Chen followed Dugu Qiubai's footsteps into the afterlife, his body falling to the ground, proceeding into the abyss. After Jian Chen had fallen, the area in which he and Dugu Qiubai had fallen started to shake. So much so, that the two sword-like mountain peaks emitted a loud sound that shook the heavens and split the two mountains in half. Countless boulders and stones tumbled down the mountainside, creating an avalanche in all directions. The sky turned purple and green and the heavens and earth were illuminated. The colors danced and mixed to form a beautiful picture, and it was a shame that neither Jian Chen nor Dugu Qiubai were alive to see it, or the series of events which would follow afterwards. Inside a spacious and luxurious mansion, was a room decorated with great splendor. Outside this room, a large group of people had gathered. A young male paced relentlessly in front of the doors, his face was filled with anxiety and worry. He looked to be 30 years of age, and he gave off a majestic aura. Although he had aged a little, one could still see the handsome youth that he once was. He was wearing a gold-lined silver chongpao, which added to his handsome appearance, and he was surrounded by an aura similar to that of a host. His face was resolute, even his eyebrows were knitted together, almost forming a single lump. 3 meters outside of the room, a group of 30 people, ranging from young to old, were all lined up nervously. The elders of the group looked to be 60 to 70 years old already, with white hair all over their wrinkled faces. However, despite their age, their eyes could still make people shiver and quake in fear from the godly lights that flickered within. Judging by the glow from their eyes, the amount of fear they could inflict on others was so much that people wouldn't take them to be frail old men at all, but rather robust and healthy middle-aged men with the strengths of a tiger and dragon combined. The rest of the men were all around 30 to 40 years old, with imposing auras and eyes that revealed nothing. It was obvious with only one glance that this was not a group of normal people. And within the room in front of them, the sounds of a woman crying in pain could be heard. "Madam, keep on pushing, the baby is almost out. I repeat, the baby is almost out." An elderly but impatient voice could be heard through the pain-filled echoes. Those who could hear the voice could tell the owner of the voice was an elderly woman. Outside the room, the middle-aged man who was anxiously pacing about, abruptly froze in place and spoke with a sense of urgency. This has been going on for an entire day and night already, how has Yunner not given birth? If this drags on for any longer, I'm afraid even Yunner will face an unfavorable situation. Even the man's voice was filled with never-ending anxiety. "My lord, please don't worry too much. Madame Yunner will definitely be fine. You forget that Madame Yunner is a bright Saint Master." A white-haired elder spoke with a tone of confidence, but even his face could not hide the look of worry on it. "Ai." The lord clad in a white chongpao began to sigh again repeatedly. The worry and anxiety on his face did not decrease even the slightest amount. Eventually, after the men outside had waited for 2 more hours, an excited voice came from within the room. My lord, Madame Yunner has given birth. She has given birth and is safe. And so is the boy. The amount of emotion in the voice was stirring up excitement throughout the house. Upon hearing that, the middle-aged man that was waiting anxiously became slack-jawed, the wariness in his face had been completely wiped out and replaced with an expression of joy and emotions. He was so emotionally moved that he couldn't find the right words to say, and blew open the doors so quickly that it was as if they didn't exist in the first place. His speed was almost inconceivable. No ordinary man could possess enough strength to pull off the same amount of speed he had just displayed. The middle-aged man immediately flashed over to the bedside and sat down beside it. His face was full of concern as he looked at the woman who was reclining on top of it. "Yunner, how are you feeling? You have to be all right." Despite his excitement, his voice was gentle and was brimming with concern. On top of the bed was a woman who was in the peak of her 20s. Her appearance was so beautiful, it could cause an entire state to fight and collapse upon itself for her hand. Her exhausted and pale face was drenched in sweat, but still managed to retain a divine look. The female looked up with a tired expression at the man by her side and smiled, "My dear husband, I am fine. Please just allow me to see my baby." "Oh. Yes. Right away. As long as Yunner is fine." The man started to smile with joy, but he turned around and looked at the bundled-up child in the midwife's arms. Right as he was about to speak, the eyebrows on the midwife knitted together and stared with rapt attention at the infant she was holding. Her arms continued to rock the bundle as she muttered, "Cry baby, go on and cry. What child are you that you do not cry? How odd, I have delivered many babies, and although the numbers have not reached over 1,000 babies, I have helped given birth to over 900. However, this is the first time I have seen a freshly delivered baby that does not cry." But at the same time she spoke, the men who were outside all piled into the room, each one of them had a smile on their faces. One after another each person began to congratulate the woman on the bed. The middle-aged man was still smiling greatly and spoke to the woman, "Yunner, you should rest up first. I'll bring the child over in a second." The man then got up and walked towards the midwife. "What's wrong? Could it be there's some sort of problem with the child?" His voice had dropped down slightly. Sometimes, some children would be born with diseases. This occurrence wasn't uncommon, and would actually happen often. He was already afraid that his newly born child had some sort of problem. Hearing his question, the midwife's face went sour as she looked at him, and said respectfully, "My lord, the young lord has no problems that I am aware of, but according to my 10 years of experience, every newborn child will start to cry. But this young lord is different. Look here, ever since his birth, he hasn't uttered even a single peep of sound. This is an extremely strange situation." The man's forehead creased in thought as he looked at the bundled infant. The infant's eyes were bright and showed no impurities within them as it looked all over the place. One moment he would look over here, and the next moment he would look over there. He was very cute in this way, and just by looking at him you would think there were no problems with him. However, the man didn't notice that the infant's bright eyes didn't have a single impurity in the vast abyss of his pupils. In fact, it had seemed like his eyes held a profoundness that shook the man's inner self, though he himself didn't believe it. Then as he put his hand on top of the infant, he saw a fine layer of yellow light suddenly float around his palm. Seeing the middle-aged man's movement, the midwife's face became uneasy. She was only a small midwife, one of society's lowest class, but even she was afraid if there was a problem with the child. If there was one, then the man would blame her, and she would not be able to recover from it. Despite the fact that this situation was not related to her in any way, she wouldn't have the power to say otherwise. The man quickly took his hand back, his own heart was finally at ease. A smile returned to his face once more as he laughed, "The child is safe and sound, I can't find even a single problem." He took the bundle from the midwife with another laugh. Upon hearing this, the midwife let out a breath of air in relief. With her heart rate slowly going back to normal, Even she started to laugh in excitement. What the Lord says is correct, perhaps this is a representation of the young Lord's future. He will surely become a strong and unique individual as he grows. As he listened to the midwife, knowing that this was an extraordinarily vague thing to say, he still couldn't help but laugh. Yes, 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 I can only hope so. Someone come here. Let us reward Mother Hong with 100 gold coins. The midwife's face grew joyously and immediately said with emotion, I give the Lord many thanks, many thanks indeed. The father brought the infant to his mother on the bed and smiled, Yunner, look. This is our child, look how cute he is. Yunner held on to the child tenderly and gave him a kiss on the forehead and spoke happily, Dear husband, since our child is a boy, then as per our agreement beforehand, we shall call him Changyang Xiang Tian. Laughing, the husband said, Not bad, I hereby officially declare that this child's name will be Changyang Xiang Tian. Come all. I invite all of my guests here today, tomorrow there will be a feast in my son's honor. We shall celebrate greatly. In a flash, a year had already passed. In front of a small lake, the figure of a child that wasn't even 1 meter tall stood about with a blank expression. Both of his eyes were staring attentively at the rock garden in the middle of the lake. The little boy was wearing a gorgeous set of clothes, but the expression on his face was unusually complex in a way that was strange to see on a 1-year-old boy. To be precise, this boy was Changyang Xiang Tian. And in this moment inside of his mind, a hair-raising scene was constantly playing. Just as if watching a movie reel, all he could see were pictures of mountain ranges that looked like 2 giant swords. Another image of a handsome young man of 20 years old with a sword came to his mind, along with the 100-year-old battle-hardened figure of Dugu Qiubai. Finally, at the time of his immediate death, he remembered the breakthrough he had experienced that had allowed him to reach into the realm of the Sword God. After that, he remembered stabbing Dugu Qiubai through the neck, ending in their mutual destruction. Chapter 3. Refining the Body. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Xiang Tian looked at his tiny body and gasped. The look on his face could only be described as complex. Over the past year, he had lost count of how often moments of his past life had flashed before his eyes. The memories were so fresh in his mind, it was almost as if everything happened only yesterday, as if engraved into the very depths of his soul. No matter what he did, he couldn't forget the memories, but he understood now, he was called Jian Chen in his past life. After his death, he had carried with him the mysteries of his memory and soul, and had been reincarnated. He retained all of his memories even after his reincarnation, so even after being born, he already knew how to talk. And according to the conversations from the people at his bedside, he had a rough idea of what type of household he was in. More importantly, he had learned that he was no longer in the same world as before. This was a new world that Jian Chen had never heard of. Even the mansion Jian Chen lived in had a name, Changyang Mansion. The mansion belonged to one of Luo'er City's top 4 families, each had a foothold of power and influence. His own father was actually the leader of the Changyang clan named Changyang Ba. His mother was named by Yun Tian and was the 4th concubine for the clan leader. Although she wasn't the primary wife, she still had a considerable amount of power in the family because she held the title of a Radiant Saint Master. Even though Jian Chen didn't understand what a Radiant Saint Master was, he did understand that it was because his mother was a Radiant Saint Master that her status was high in the clan, and there were many that respected her. In regards to Jian Chen himself, he was the Changyang clan's 4th young lord, and had a majestic status within the clan. Jian Chen also had 2 elder brothers and an elder sister. The first brother was Changyang Hu, the sister was Changyang Mingyue, and the second brother was Changyang Ku. The 4 of them shared the same father, but each had a different mother. Excluding Changyang Hu, Changyang Mingyue and Changyang Ku had met with him multiple times and were both only a few years older than him. The eldest of the siblings was Changyang Mingyu, who was 4 years old, 3 years older than Jian Chen. Changyang Ku was 2 years older than him. Aside from them 4, however, there were still many other children in the family. At this time, an elderly housekeeper came up from behind Jian Chen and spoke softly, "Fourth young lord, it's getting late, and your mother is looking for you." Jian Chen was immediately jolted back to reality. Looking at the sky, he had come to the sudden realization that the sky was dimming, an indication of the impending night. Unconsciously, Jian Chen had been standing there for the whole afternoon. "I understand, Chang Bai. I will go back in a second." Chang Bai was the housekeeper for the Changyang clan and essentially took care of every single matter within the family. Because of this, his status within the clan was fairly high. Although he was only a housekeeper, he had garnered a good amount of respect, practically the same amount as the head of the house himself had. A smile adorned Chang Bai's face as he watched Jian Chen with high expectations. Even when Jian Chen was only half a year old, he hadn't needed the help of others to walk, and quickly learned how to speak within 8 months. Not only could he speak clearly, but he could even communicate with others. With these 2 achievements alone, Jian Chen had already been called a genius, and many were eagerly awaiting to see how he would grow up. At night, Jian Chen accompanied his mother, Bai Yuntian, to eat dinner in the dining hall. The dining hall they both sat in was special, only the head of the house, his concubines, and his children could eat there. When Bai Yuntian and Jian Chen arrived at the dining hall, 3 beauties were already sitting at the circular dinner table. Each one of them looked to be in their 20s, and 2 of them each held a child in their arms. One of the children was a boy, and the other was a girl. The boy was around 3.4 years old, and was healthy but chubby. He was the 3rd son and young lord of Changyang Ba, Changyang Ku. The moment Changyang Ku saw Jian Chen, hostility and hatred swelled up in his eyes. It was clear to see that he was brimming with the intent to start something, and one could tell that he held a bias against Jian Chen. The 4 ladies could all sense the hostility radiating from Changyang Ku towards Jian Chen, but none of them spared a second thought about it. In their minds, this was merely a small matter between children, and definitely not something that would be of great matter. The other child was a 4.5-year-old girl with 2 ponytails. Her bright eyes looked at the still hostile Changyang Ku and laughed. With her 2 dimples that appeared with each laugh, she looked exceptionally cute. Although she was underage now, it was certain that after she grew older, she would have beauty that could rival the gods. This child was the second born of Changyang Ba, as well as the sole female child Changyang Mingyue. "4th brother, you're here. Come and sit." Upon seeing Jian Chen, the smile on her face had become even more splendid, as she waved him over. Jian Chen nodded towards Changyang Mingyue as a greeting, and sat down with his mother at the dinner table. Bai Yuntian began to pamper Jian Chen, softly saying, "Xiang'er, say hello to your aunts and siblings." Without any other choice, Jian Chen looked at the pampered ladies, "Hello eldest aunt, second aunt, third aunt, second sister, and third brother." Ever since his mother had discovered that he could speak efficiently, she had been ecstatically teaching him the basic rules of etiquette. With Jian Chen's go with the flow mindset, he didn't object to her teachings. It would prove beneficial to him in the long run as well in this new world. When he had first arrived in this strange new place, he had struggled intensely with this new body. Since he was reincarnated with his old memories, he still felt like Jian Chen. Deep within his soul, he did not think this new life was his, but as time went on, he gradually accepted his new body and life. No matter what though, Bai Yuntian was still his mother. Although it was a mystery on how he managed to retain his memories, they had been from a place on another world. It had no relationship to this new world, so Jian Chen had decided to hide away the memories in the deepest part of his mind. It was time to accept his new life and give it everything he had. The 3 ladies all smiled at Jian Chen. One of the ladies wearing golden robes laughed, "Sister Yunair, it would appear that Xiang Tian is getting more and more intelligent. AI. It's getting harder and harder to only see him as a 1-year-old child. I truly am envious of you for having such an intelligent child." The lady who spoke was the second wife of Changyang Ba and mother to Changyang Mingyue by Yu Xuan. That's right, younger sister Yunair, what second sister said is correct. Each and every day, I grow even more fond of Xiang Tian. Sitting next to Jian Chen with a tranquil look was another one of the four ladies. She was the third wife, Yu Feng Yen. Xiang Tian is certainly a child genius. To be able to walk at 6 months and speak at 8, these are feats that no other child his age would be able to replicate. I find myself anxious to see how much saint energy he has when he undergoes the test in 2 years, though I do sincerely hope that he will give us all a pleasant surprise when the time comes. The next lady who spoke was significantly older, and seemed much more temperamental than the others. She was the first wife, Ling Long. The moment Ling Long finished her sentence, a deep manly voice spoke out, I agree. I look forward to when Xiang Tian reaches his 3rd year for this pleasant surprise as well. A 30-year-old man entered the dining hall, carrying himself with the manner of a master. With a white Chang Pao decorated with golden outlines, and a head of black hair that reached his shoulders, the man gave off a relaxed atmosphere. Husband. Father. Immediately after seeing the man, the 7 people at the table all stood up at once and called out one after the other. Jian Chen was no exception, and softly cried out. This young man was indeed the head of the Changyang clan, Changyang Ba. Changyang Ba strolled down to the dinner table and sat down with a gentle smile on his face. With a look at Jian Chen, he asked, Xiang, are you feeling happy living here still? Jian Chen nodded his head, yes. A smile curled up on Changyang Ba's face, Xiang, if you ever feel closed in this stuffy old house, feel free to explore the outside and experience it for yourself. I know, father. Jian Chen replied. Changyang Ba was indescribably happy at how intelligent Jian Chen was and how much he differed from any other 1-year-old. The family dinner went by joyously and the meal was consumed quickly. Afterwards, Jian Chen returned to his room alone. Based on his age, he should have been sleeping in the same room as his mother, but he had requested that he wanted his own room. Regarding this request, Jian Chen had been firm, and wouldn't be persuaded otherwise. Bai Yuntian had ended up accepting his request. And so that night, Jian Chen sat crossed-legged on his bed, with both of his hands on his knees. The palms of his hands were facing upwards, as was his face, as he silently went through the motions of practicing the first principle of Azulite Sword Law. Azulite Sword Law, this was what Jian Chen had been studying for 20 years in his previous world and had become the strongest weapon in his arsenal. It was a type of cultivation that was both rare and formidable, it had principles that were profound and also contained many strong techniques. The Azulite Sword Law was something that Jian Chen had stumbled upon when he was a child. He had accidentally fallen off of a cliff while playing in the mountains, and somehow managed to survive the fall by landing in a pool of water. When he had awoken, he had found himself trapped in a cavern with fish as his only source of food. After finding the manual, he had dedicated himself to learning it, and finally succeeded after 10 years. With his breakthrough, he was able to jump out of the cavern and return to the lands above. Jian Chen was a war orphan who had been taken in by his great-grandfather and grandmother. 10 years had passed while he was trapped in a cave, so when he had returned to the village, his great-grandparents had already passed away from old age a long time ago. After paying his respects to them, the now alone Jian Chen left his little mountainside village to travel the world by himself. Jian Chen had accepted what life had given him in his past life, and he had accepted this new life as well. With this acceptance, he had started cultivating and refining his body for half a year, ready to regain his strength. Chapter 4. Further training. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The Azulite Sword Law was divided into 12 different layers. The first layer was cultivating the body. A common saying was that if one wanted strong martial arts, then one must first have a strong body. After all, martial arts relied on the efficient use of the body, hence why the first layer of Azulite Sword Law was pertaining to the body. Most martial artists relied on strengthening their bodies in order to improve their own strength. Therefore they would strengthen their bodies and end up with bulging muscles everywhere. It was clear to the naked eye how strong someone was by build alone. Some people had even built their bodies to the point of their bones being as hard as reinforced steel bars. To Jian Chen, this type of method to train the body would only ruin the body and would only narrow the potential of the human body. So although this method would increase one's strength past a normal person's, at the same time, it would bring about a large amount of damage to the body. The people who trained this way generally had a short lifespan. When they were in the elderly phase, diseases and impairment within the body would happen at a higher frequency for them. The wandering martial artists of the world have many different sects with their own way of cultivating the body, but to Jian Chen, these methods were mediocre. These were not the right paths to take, even the Shaolin way of I Ching Jing was no exception. TL note. https://n.wikipedia.org/wiki/ijin_jing. Even though the principles of I Ching Jing were beautiful in how it cultivated the inner strength and how it also strengthened the outer muscles, but I Ching Jing's way of strengthening the body was still the same. It didn't strengthen the very core of a human and only focused on external force only. This could not be considered the pinnacle of cultivating the body if it did not target the entire body. The methods written in Azulite Sword Law were truly profound and magical. By absorbing both the qi of the heavens and the earth and then transforming it, one could incorporate it within the bones of the body. This allowed every organ and even every single cell in the body to be strengthened to their limits. The original frailty would be cast away and the body would reach the most optimal state while giving the body endless amounts of benefits like a longer lifespan. When one practiced the later methods, your corporeal body would reach new heights in strength, and as Azulite Sword Law indicated, if one could reach the highest levels of cultivating the body, then they could even live as long as the heavens and the earth. However, this method was associated with one's own strength. If one's qi was stronger than the physical body, then Azulite Sword Law would use that qi and incorporate that into the body to become stronger. In the case that one's physical body and one's qi strength were both at an equilibrium, then one would have to make a breakthrough to reach the next level. Only with this cycle would one be able to continuously improve their entire body without limits. Jian Chen was slowly absorbing the world's qi in a never-ending stream and was circulating it in a cycle throughout his body. Then under Jian Chen's control, the qi would be incorporated into his cells and organs. Ever since he had arrived at this strange new world, one of the few things that had excited Jian Chen was the world essence. The world essence was extremely dense, perhaps 100 times more dense than the qi back in his world. Compared to the previous world, Jian Chen had nowhere to go but the old mountain range where he had died. One world was paradise, the other world was hell. The difference was simply that clear to see, so Jian Chen was extremely happy about that. However, what Jian Chen couldn't understand was the difference between the world essence of this world and the world essence of his past world. While both were the same in feeling, Jian Chen was carefully discovering that the world essence had an extra type of energy. This type of energy was a small part of the world essence and was interconnected as if blended together so that they could not be separated. When he had absorbed this new type of energy into his body, nothing negative happened. So because of that, Jian Chen had not tried to remove the clearly different energy from the world essence. However, Jian Chen was now curious in the matter. Thoughts and ideas were swirling around his head, but this new energy was not that simple to be figured out so easily. After the never-ending world essence had been absorbed into his body, Jian Chen could clearly feel every single artery and cell in his body become stronger. The world essence that was taken into his body was like a giant health tonic that made his body feel alive as it absorbed it. His body was like a giant thirsty tiger that wanted more and more. While at the same time, Jian Chen was feeling a pleasurable sensation from all over, and felt free from worry as the feeling carried him away. In a flash, another year had gone by. Jian Chen had been in this strange world for 2 whole years now. During those 2 years, Jian Chen didn't take a single step outside of the Changyang mansion. Every day during his free time, Jian Chen was alone in his room practicing the first principle of Azulite Sword Law, body cultivation. Perhaps it was because this world essence was 100 times denser than the world essence in his past world, but in 1 year Jian Chen had already reached major success in cultivating his body. At the current moment, without a doubt, if an average person swung an average sword at him, then his body would not be scratched at all. He had trained his body so much that even a single cut would not be made. Of course, this was only what Jian Chen had thought of himself, he wouldn't dare try it out on himself personally. In this past year, Jian Chen's body was developing at such a fast rate, it was inconceivable. In a single year, he had already reached a height of 1.2 meter, an abnormal height for a 2-year-old. This height had actually made him look to be closer to 5 or 6 years old instead. Because of this, everyone in the Changyang mansion had been alarmed beyond belief, although many of them still had vast expectations for him. Expectations hoping that he would be a genius with unlimited potential, but everyone would have to wait for when he turned 3 in order to confirm anything. Regarding this expectation put on him, Jian Chen couldn't help but feel helpless. He didn't understand that the reason why his body had grown so fast was due to practicing Azulite Sword Law, because back in his previous world, he did not have Azulite Sword Law by his age. Although he still accompanied his mother by Yuntian to the dining hall, but as usual he had still shut himself off in his room every night. Sitting on the bed with crossed legs and his hands on his knees, he would close his eyes and face the sky once more. But this time, Jian Chen wasn't cultivating his body, but instead he was pondering. It had been 2 years since he arrived at this world, and in those 2 years, he had never seen the outside world from beyond Changyang Mansion. He spent the majority of his days locked up to cultivate his body. Up until now, he still did not understand much about this world. Outside of Changyang Mansion, he practically knew nothing about this world, even what the outside world looked like. He understood in his heart that in everyone else's eyes, he was a 2-year-old boy. A 2-year-old boy would generally be happily cherished by his parents while growing up carefreely. Jian Chen, however, would not be in that situation at all. As he was thinking on his bed, Jian Chen finally decided that tomorrow morning, he would ask his parents. It was important for him to know and understand what the outside world was like in this world. After thinking it out, Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes and got off the bed. Tonight, he would not be cultivating his body on top of his bed as usual, but instead he would stand in the central point of his room with his eyes closed. In Jian Chen's mind, a pair of mysterious footsteps began to appear. Then a picture appeared inside of Jian Chen's mind. Just like a movie reel, the picture never seemed to stop, but all he could see was a figure wearing a white changpao. It was a young man holding a sword that was quickly pacing through a mysterious land. He was walking so fast, that a regular person would have a hard time seeing him clearly. Because the young man was walking far too quickly despite the small amount of room he was in, a series of after images were trailing behind him. This figure was the previous incarnation of Jian Chen, and the steps that were appearing were actually symbolizing Azulite Sword Law, truly a mysterious image. As the morning daylight shone through a crack of a window into his room, Jian Chen suddenly opened his eyes as he stood in the middle of the room. In this hour, he had finally moved, his legs moved so fast that it was practically a blur. For his legs to maintain this type of speed for some time, even most martial artists wouldn't be able to keep up in this condition. Jian Chen's legs were moving in a mysterious way as he walked about in a certain trajectory. As he moved around his room quickly, his legs had whipped up a small whirlwind due to the extremely fast-paced movement he was making. Although this event did not go on for long, Jian Chen stopped moving, as his face was turning paler by the second. Slowly gasping for breath, both of Jian Chen's legs couldn't help but shiver and quake as he paused. Jian Chen slowly walked to his window and sat down next to it. Bending his lower back, both of his arms massaged his legs continuously. Pursuing the mysterious footsteps for that one moment had caused his legs to become incomparably weak. He couldn't even use the smallest amount of power in his legs anymore. Jian Chen shook his head helplessly. No matter what type of martial art to cultivate himself, the first thing he had to do was attain a better build. Not only that, but the more profound a martial art was, the higher its requirement. When it came to the exercise of following the footsteps, if he did not have a strong physical physique and a strong qi, then he would not have been able to last very long. Of course, normal practitioners would not be able to hold up for as long as he had, and if they had tried, then they would have exerted their body beyond what it could take and damage it. It was not easy to acquire a profound ability after all. Sitting by his bed after massage his legs, he waited for his leg to be returned to their original state before sitting cross-legged on the bed again. Once more he began to absorb the spiritual qi from the world and absorb it into his body. The night went by quickly, and in a flash the sky was filled with the colors of the day. And at that moment, a sound could be heard coming outside of Jian Chen's room. Fourth Master, it's daytime, time to get up, came the obviously feminine cry. Hearing the sound, Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes and cried out in his childish voice, I know, Sister Honghua, I'm already awake. With that said, he climbed down from his bed. Yet at this time, the door was opened, and two girls around the age of 18 came walking in. Both of them were carrying a small serving tray with a basin on it. Rolled around the basin was a new clean and tidy towel meant for him to wash his face with. The other tray had also another basin for Jian Chen to wash his teeth in to prepare himself for the day. Chapter 5. Tian Yuan Continent. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sister Honghua, Sister Dong Mei, thank you for your troubles. Looking at the 18-year-old girls, Jian Chen thanked the two quietly. These two maids were the servants of the Changyang family and were specifically meant to cater to the everyday needs of Jian Chen. Since Jian Chen was always by himself in his room, his mother Bai Yuntian had hired two servant girls to wait upon him. Hearing Jian Chen, the two girls laughed sweetly and then said, Fourth Master, by all means, don't be so polite. We are just doing what we are supposed to do. That's right, Fourth Master, please refrain from being so courteous in the future. If the elders hear about the treatment you're giving us, then we may be penalized harshly. The other servant girl had said. Jian Chen smiled, don't worry, I wouldn't talk like this if others were around. Jian Chen was extraordinarily intelligent, and the Changyang mansion had strict rules regarding statuses. If the fourth master was to be heard saying such words, then it would be sure that the two girls would not be punished lightly. After washing his face, Jian Chen departed from his room and walked toward his mother's room as usual. The distance between the two wasn't far, it was only 20 meters away from his own room. Shortly after entering the room, Jian Chen saw his mother at the dressing table putting on makeup with the help of her own two servant girls standing next to her. Xiang'er, you're here earlier than usual today. With a glance at Jian Chen, a gentle smile full of love and adoration could be seen. Seeing that expression of love on her face, Jian Chen's own heart became soft. In his previous world, Jian Chen had lost both parents when he was small and thus had never known about motherly love, or even experienced it. But when he had came to this world, he had clearly felt the power of this motherly love. And so because of that, he had started to treasure this feeling of love slowly over time. Jian Chen walked up to the side of his mother and rubbed his stomach and said with an embarrassed laugh, your son is hungry. After the rigorous exercise from last night, he had been feeling the slight pangs of hunger. Bai Yuntian placed a gentle hand on top of Jian Chen's head and laughed, then in a moment mother will take you to the dining hall to eat. Yeah. Jian Chen nodded his head, a look of satisfaction on his face. In his heart, he secretly enjoyed the loving concern his mother had shown him. Pausing for another second, Jian Chen opened his mouth again, mother. Bai Yuntian looked at Jian Chen warmly and said, Xiang'er, if you have something you want to say it. Jian Chen hesitated for a second before recollecting his inner thoughts. Looking at his mother again, he said, Mother, could you please tell your child what the outside world is like? Hearing Jian Chen, Bai Yuntian was clearly shocked by his question. Opening her mouth, she asked, Xiang'er, could it be you're interested in the outside world? Your son is only curious. He answered. Bai Yuntian laughed, Xiang'er, the outside world is extremely vast and also extremely complicated. The matters of the outside world could not be made clear through words alone. If you want to learn about it, then it would be best if you went to the library and read a few books on it. Even as she voiced her answer, Bai Yuntian's face had looked a little bit helpless. But Xiang'er, you still don't know how to read, even if you go to the library, you wouldn't be able to read any of the words. Mother, then why don't we bring some people to teach me how to read? Jian Chen's voice contained some dissatisfaction. Giggling, Bai Yuntian said, Xiang'er, you are only 2 years old. Your mother has never heard or seen a 2-year-old child learn how to read before. Even in the entire Tianyuan continent, this type of situation has never happened before. Generally speaking, the earliest any child has ever started to learn to read was when they were around 4 to 5 years old. Jian Chen understood instantly, Mother, your son wants to learn to read. Could you please find some people to try and teach me still? Bai Yuntian was speechless, but a happy smile crept up on her face nonetheless. Xiang'er, learning to read is an exhausting task as well as being extremely boring. You must understand that there are many different words in the continent. This isn't something that can be learned quickly. Are you sure you want to start learning now? Jian Chen nodded his head in confirmation, I am. Hearing Jian Chen's answer, Bai Yuntian's smile became even more splendid. With a happy laugh, she said, if this is what Xiang'er's request is, then mother will support you entirely. Turning her head, she called out, Xiao Lu. In a moment, go to Lore City and hire the most prestigious teacher and bring him to the mansion so he can teach my Xiang'er how to read. Yes, my lady. The servant girl who was combing Bai Yuntian's hair agreed respectfully. Xiang'er, it's been a decent amount of time, let us go to the dining halls before the both of us starve. The day went by quickly, and when the second day came, the teacher Bai Yuntian had hired arrived at the mansion and began to teach him to read. And so from that moment on, Jian Chen would spend his daytime earnestly studying how to read. Since he retained some mental fortitude and knowledge from his memories of the past. Learning the written language of this new world was not all that difficult. Combined with the teacher who was putting his heart and soul in teaching him as well as his amazing memorization capabilities, learning to read was extremely fast and easy for him. In just a short span of 3 months, he had already mastered the most basic words of the continent. Jian Chen's learning rate had made the teacher exclaim in astonishment. Immediately after Bai Yuntian had learned that he had learned most of the written language in 3 months, she couldn't believe it. In the end, she had put Jian Chen in a test before she could accept the fact. If one wanted to read and write most of the words used in the continent to the extent Jian Chen had, then one needed to spend at least 2 years. To have Jian Chen accomplish this in 3 months while it took most 2 years, not even any of the geniuses could claim to have accomplished this feat. This achievement quickly reached the ears of Jian Chen's father. Changyang Ba had then personally paid a visit to Jian Chen about it. Xiang'er, you have endured much in such a short amount of time, it's time to relax for now. Let your father give you a reward, since you have painstakingly learned to read in these past few months. I don't know what reward Xiang'er would want though. Changyang Ba's face contained a smile as he looked down at Jian Chen as he spoke. Having such a genius for a son, he was extremely proud of himself and cared much more for Jian Chen than any other child automatically. Hearing this, Jian Chen's eyes brightened and thought for only a few seconds before responding, Father, would you allow your son to go to the library and read some of the books there so I can get some experience and learn even more? Changyang Ba's eyes brightened as he looked at Jian Chen with gratification. With a loud laugh, he said, this is no problem at all, Xiang'er. You have a heart that desires to improve itself, and your father is proud of this. I approve of your request. The library will be free to you whenever you desire. Thank you, father. Jian Chen's face exuded a happy expression. To be able to enter the library was an achievement that Jian Chen could truly be happy about. After all, he had understood that the library wasn't a place anyone could walk in freely. One had to be 6 years old or older and had to be directly descended from the Changyang clan in order to enter. Of course, if one received the permission from the clan leader, then the requirements could be waived. Soon after, Changyang Ba began to dote upon Jian Chen for a while before departing from his room. After he had left, Jian Chen wasn't able to sit in his room any longer. Immediately exiting his room, he headed toward the direction of the library. After studiously learning how to read for 3 months, it all led up to this moment of being able to enter the library and look up information pertaining to the outside world. Even if there wasn't much details on the outside world in the books, Jian Chen could always go ask his mother. But the books definitely had more details than his mother, as well as being quite comprehensive. As a result, Jian Chen had placed more importance on the books. The location of the library had already been answered for Jian Chen a long time ago. It was in the back of his family's courtyard in a large pagoda. When Jian Chen entered the courts in the back, he immediately felt the presence of many experts concealed in every direction and were staring at him with viper-like eyes. With his head high and proud, Jian Chen pretended that he didn't sense the experts and walked further into the tower. If he let other people know that he could sense people that were looking at him from concealed areas, then a series of troublesome questions would follow. He was a 2-year child after all, without any knowledge about martial arts. Changyang Mansion had many direct descendants, but not many people were heading toward the library. So the only people Jian Chen had seen were the guards that protected the area, and almost no other clan member. Jian Chen quickly reached the doors to the tower before stopping to lift his head up to see the extremely large board hung above the doors of the tower. The words, "Book Pavilion," were written in fancy writing, with 2 guards standing below it. When he looked at the 2 guards, he could tell these guards were definitely not lacking in strength. Waiting for the gates to open, Jian Chen then walked in directly without being obstructed by the 2 guards. They were almost like wood carvings that stood motionlessly on the side with their backs straight. Even when Jian Chen had appeared, the 2 did not even greet him. As Jian Chen entered the inner tower, a long and narrow corridor greeted his eyes. It was daytime on the outside, and light shined down beautifully, leaving a sight like none other. On the walls of the corridor, a bright moon pearl was hung and gave off a light to illuminate the hallway. The length of the corridor was quite long, before finally splitting into 2 paths. Jian Chen estimated that both paths followed the opposite sides of the tower before finally rejoining again after a distance. "Fourth Master, the clan leader has said you have the authority to access the left side of the tower." An elderly voice called out. Coming out from the shadows slowly was a tall figure. Jian Chen turned around after hearing this. Although the light in this part of the tower was dim, he could clearly make out the appearance of the figure in the midst of the shadows. It was an elderly figure with white hair and wrinkles all over. Wearing a silver chang pao that was devoid of any other colors, even still he was relatively normal looking. No one would suspect he wasn't anything more than an ordinary elderly man. No matter how much Jian Chen looked at the old man, he couldn't see anything but mediocrity. Although he still didn't dare underestimate the old man. It was his inner instincts that told him that this old figure was an expert with extraordinary strength. The strongest man he had seen since he had entered this world was his father Changyang Ba, but it was impossible to measure his father to what Jian Chen was feeling from this old man. Chapter 6 Saints Test. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Although Jian Chen could see through his frail appearance and find the true strength of the old man, he remained motionless and did not reveal anything on his face. With a silent nod to show his thanks, he stepped by the old man and proceeded down the left corridor. Arriving at the end of the corridor, Jian Chen's eyes began to shine brightly as he walked into a large room. The light in this room was exceptionally bright, so much so that it was comparable to the light outside. Many neat and tidy bookshelves that contained thousands of books lined the walls of the library. Jian Chen slowly tilted his head to look at the ceiling. He knew that the reason why the light was so bright was due to the ceiling. He had no idea what material the ceiling was made from, but it was strangely emitting a strong glow. Although the light was somewhat intense, it was not to the point of irritating the eyes. Although the ceiling had piqued his interest, he wasn't willing to squander time by trying to figure it out. Walking up to a bookshelf, he finally grabbed a book and started flipping through it. The book had fairly clear descriptions written inside, despite it not being as thick as the others. It had taken Jian Chen 3 hours to completely read through the book. Because of this, he had finally gained some insights regarding this strange world. This continent was called the Tian Yuan continent and was fairly big. There were numerous countries of various sizes and even more cities of all sizes. The biggest cities were known as the capitals, and each one stretched across countless miles, and each of these capitals were ruled by a city ruler. Each ruler was also in charge of several million up to 10 million guardian soldiers. However, within the entire Tian Yuan continent, there were only 7 capitals, while 3 of the 7 were controlled by a single strong empire. Among the strongest empires were the Karl Empire and the Felicity Empire, who both controlled 2 capitals each. It was the Holy Empire that controlled the first 3 capitals. Under the capitals were the king cities, but the king cities were smaller than the capitals by a huge amount. Practically every kingdom had at the very least 1 king city, and each king city had 1,000,000 guardian soldiers. Under the king cities were the first-class cities, which had 800,000 guardian soldiers. The second-class cities had 400,000 guardian soldiers each. Under the second-class cities were the varying villages, which all had their own guardian soldiers, but their numbers wouldn't reach over 50,000. Even their strength and numbers varied greatly. The Tian Yuan continent had people that all practiced something called the Saint Force. When their Saint Force reached the 10th level, then based on the expert's ideology, the Saint Force will condense into a Saint's weapon. There were over 1,000 shapes, and each were completely dependent on the expert's ideology. As a result of the Saint weapon forming from the Saint Force, once it formed a special link with the expert. Some people with an outstanding gift would receive a Saint weapon with a special attribute. These attributes were classified as earth, wind, water, fire, light, and dark. Among these elements, light and dark were rarely seen, but were still extremely powerful. The light element was extremely strong in the healing aspect, and those who had light-attributed saint weapons were given the title of immortals in the Tian Yuan continent. They were given this title due to the fact that while on the battlefield, they could easily restore any damage taken. On the battlefield, if they were not killed in one strike, then they would be nearly impossible to defeat. Those with the dark element had a corrosive nature. Not only was this a troublesome element, but those with dark attributes were also in demand. At night, they could come and go as they pleased, earning them the titles of Night Lords, for the night was under their command. The rest of the 4 elements each had their own corresponding strengths. The amount of power they had depended on one's own strength and judgment. Of course, in the Tian Yuan continent, those who had a saint weapon with an attribute was 1 in 10 compared to those who didn't have an attribute. On a battlefield, those with an attribute were often harder to fight against than those who didn't. The saint weapons were the strongest of weapons. In a war, saint weapons could be freely summoned at will and provide assistance to their masters to help overcome their limits. At the same time, a saint weapon and its master's life were intertwined. Whatever injury the saint weapon sustained would then be equally reflected back to the master. Also, if the saint weapon ever broke, then the master would receive a fatal wound as well. If the situation was grave, then even a wound may cause death. However, saint weapons were extremely hard to break. As long as the saint weapon was stronger than the opposing force, then it would not be harmed in any way. After a saint weapon takes shape, then this new way of cultivation would absorb the chi from the world to become stronger. This method would improve one's own strength as well. Once the saint weapon was formed, then the expert would be called a saint. In the Tian Yuan continent, the saints are classified into 9 different levels. Saint, Great Saint, Saint Master, Great Saint Master, Earth Saint Master, Heaven Saint Master, Saint Ruler, Saint King and Saint Emperor. Within each of the levels, they are further separated into 3 levels: lower, middle, and upper. Within the Tianyuan continent, there lies a mountain range that was spread out across the continent called the Mountain Range of Magical Beasts. The range was filled with countless magical beasts. The further you went in, the stronger the beasts would get. These magical beasts were also separated into 9 levels. The Class 1 beasts were equivalent to a saint, while the Class 2 beasts was equivalent to a great saint. Continuing on with this, a Class 8 beast was on par with a Saint King, and finally, a Class 9 beast was equivalent to a Saint Emperor. At the same time, the Tianyuan continent had a very prominent profession called the mercenary. According to this book, the Tianyuan continent had many mercenaries. These mercenaries would accomplish a variety of tasks for money, although many mercenaries would enter the mountain range of magical beasts to hunt monsters and sell the monster cores for money. Although the dangers were big, the rewards were just as generous due to monster cores being highly valued in the continent. The higher grade a monster core was, the higher priced it was. There were some high-ranked monster cores that could not be bought with money alone. Monster cores were one of the most desired items in the continent. Inside the center of a monster core was a large amount of pure energy and could be absorbed by humans for a faster training speed. Absorbing the energy from a monster core was ultimately faster than trying to absorb the world essence into one's body. However, using the monster cores to increase the cultivation speed wasn't a method the general populace could do without having plenty of money. Other than a few odd things, Jian Chen was finally beginning to understand many things about this world. This world was exceptionally cruel and wars happened everywhere. The people of this world were more dangerous in comparison to his old world. If one wasn't strong enough, then they would find it hard to survive. Most of the people on the continent were practitioners as well, although the average practitioner would be of average strength. The average person wouldn't be able to cultivate their saint force to the 10th level and be able to condense it into a saint's weapon. If these people don't have the proper training and support, then they would remain at the lowest levels similar to a peasant in the mountains. After finishing the books, Jian Chen finally understood the new world to a better degree. Saint weapons, elements and attributes, magical beasts, monster cores and mercenaries, everything was a new experience to Jian Chen that gave his heart a thrill. He was looking forward to the new world and desperately wished to leave the Changyang mansion immediately. To be able to experience the outside world would be a refreshing change of pace. However, Jian Chen knew that he would not be able to fulfill his desires in the upcoming years. His parents would never allow a 3-year-old child to leave their home for the outside world. Even if he could leave his home, he would have no way of defending himself. After a long period of time, Jian Chen decided to put even more effort into his training. Aside from his daily meals, every day was spent training alone within his room. He still hadn't completed the basics of the cultivation stage of Azulite Sword Law, so the world essence he had been absorbing was distributed equally throughout his body, entering each cell and strengthening his body. That it was only when his body could no longer be strengthened by the world essence would Jian Chen be able to break through to the second stage, where he would start the formal training of his true qi. Currently, Jian Chen still had the physique far beyond that of a normal person, however some regions of his body where qi previously gathered in his past world were still empty. In his previous world, Jian Chen had managed to finish the cultivation stage within a single year. Since this world essence was stronger by at least 2-fold, even though it was taking him more than 2 years to make a breakthrough, his body was getting stronger and stronger, giving his current body the potential to be even stronger than his previous body. Although Jian Chen normally spent the entire day hiding in his room to cultivate, neither of his parents had outwardly expressed any sort of bafflement or concern. The reason for this was because in the Changyang mansion, the parents would generally teach the children a method of breathing and let them train for a year. By the 3rd year, these children would take a test to see how strong their saint power was and evaluate their potential as well as their aptitude. When Jian Chen was 2 years old, Bai Yuntian had taught him the same breathing method as the other children had learned. However, Jian Chen had taken this breathing exercise and tossed it into the depths of his mind, for Jian Chen had felt that this sort of training was like giving an adult a child's toy to play with. As a result, Jian Chen had locked himself in his room. People passing by had only thought that Jian Chen was practicing the breathing method, and paid no attention to him. The following morning, Jian Chen had finally finished last night's cultivation exercise. Today was a special day for him, since it was his 3rd birthday. At the same time, today would be the day that he would undergo the very same test as any other 3-year-old in the Tianyuan continent, the Saint's Test. Accompanying his mother Bai Yuntian to the dining halls, Jian Chen was then later taken to the Changyang clan's official main hall. The Changyang mansion covered a large amount of area, and compared to the area Jian Chen was used to, he had only experienced a small portion of the land. Walking along the road, Jian Chen looked at the mansion without stopping. In his first 3 years, Jian Chen had spent the vast majority of his time within his own room and cultivated, very rarely did he stroll around the mansion. Within the Changyang mansion, a large group of uniformed patrolmen were walking around the area. Many sharp eyes were staring all around from hidden areas, and despite it being the daytime, they still did not show the slightest sense of relaxation. As Jian Chen walked past a series of training grounds, a young, but soft shout had gotten his attention from the inside. A mere glance inside would show a small group of 10-year-olds being taught some martial art drills by a middle-aged man. Jian Chen understood in his heart that these children were disciples born directly into the family line. The Changyang clan had about 1,000 clansmen. Although half of them were guardsmen and servants, the other half were members that were born from within the clan line. Walking past the training grounds, Bai Yuntian led her son to the middle of an official-looking hallway. This was where Jian Chen would undergo the Saint's Test. Chapter 7. Forgotten Genius. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Even though the outside hall was vast, the interior of the Changyang main hallways were even larger. Currently there were dozens of people strewn about, among them were a few middle-aged men who were dressed differently that stood out from the rest. Bai Yuntian led Jian Chen to their seats in the front of the hallway. Those who had wanted to sit at the front had to have a high status in the clan, and since Jian Chen was the 4th son of the clan leader, he had the right to sit at the front. However, his own seat wasn't created yet, so he had to share a single chair with his mother. The lovable Jian Chen sat down on his mother's lap gently and didn't say anything. In a flash, a line of people came streaming into the hall one by one before stopping in front of their seats. Among the newcomers was Jian Chen's 3rd aunt carrying her child along. Hey, 4th brother, today is the day you take the Saint Test. You have to work hard so you don't let 2nd sister down. Changyang Mingyue's pretty face smiled at Jian Chen as she spoke in a soft but enthusiastic voice. Although she was soft-spoken, everyone in the hall had clearly heard who and what she was talking about. Mingyu. Her mother looked at her sharply as she spoke with soft rebuke. Changyang Mingyue laughed and stuck her tongue out at Jiang Chen. Without any further words, she peacefully sat down right next to her mother's side as her bright eyes blinked rapidly as she sized up the other people in the hall. Soon enough, everybody in the hall were all seated while they all looked at Jian Chen from time to time with looks of expectations shown clearly on their faces. The reason why many people were gathered was due to Jian Chen's Saint Test. If it was any other child of the clan, then there would not have been such a massive turnout for the Saint Test. But Jian Chen wasn't a regular child with no status, he was the child to the clan leader of the Changyang clan as well as having an innate talent blessed by the heavens. The whole clan had practically placed all of their expectations on this child, hence why when it was Jian Chen's turn to undergo the Saint Test, every clan member would be there. After all, Jian Chen had many different achievements under his belt, and the Saint Test would be another important milestone for him. When everyone had settled down, Jian Chen's father Changyang Ba stepped towards the middle of the hall and sat down on the throne that signified his status as the clan leader with a great blade right next to him. Changyangba's eyes stopped on Jian Chen for only a second, but Jian Chen could see the faintest of smiles on it. Immediately afterwards, a voice spoke out, signifying the start of Jian Chen's saint test. "De Shu, I'm sorry to have you take control of the saint test ceremony," Changyangba said politely towards the elder. The elder looked to be around 60 to 70 years old, white-haired man who wore gray clothing. Although his face was full of wrinkles, his eyes were bright and filled with excitement. The old man laughed. "The clan leader is too modest." Walking towards the center now, he carried a smile on his face as he looked at Jian Chen before calling out in a friendly tone, "Fourth master, if you please." Bai Yuntian looked at Jian Chen with a great look of affection and whispered, "Xiang'er, please go to where De Shu is standing so he can test for your saint force." "Okay." Jian Chen said lightly. The clever child got off of his seat and with his small paces, he slowly approached to where the elder De stood. Without further ado, De Shu lifted his right hand where a small silver ring began to glow with a dazzling white light. Waving it over, the smallest of trembles could be heard coming from the ground before slowly increasing in sound. Right where there was nothing in front of them, a white stone half a meter large suddenly appeared. It was clear to see that the white stone had been polished countless of times. The entire rectangular-shaped rock, the width and thickness was both at a meter long. Looking at the newly emerged white stone, Jian Chen's eyes blinked in surprise. He had felt quite curious about this stone, but De Shu's right hand had also caught his interest. He stared intensely at the ring on his middle finger. It was the ring he had seen from the books. The space ring was made from rare but special materials, and could store items within the space of the ring. The smallest object it could store was a meter cubed, while the biggest object it could store was 100 meters cubed. One could store and take out any inanimate object as they pleased. This was an item that was so expensive in the Tianyuan continent that the common person would not be able to afford it. Seeing Jian Chen looking at the space ring adorned on his middle finger, De Shu laughed. Whenever he had summoned the white stone for the saint test, everyone around would give him the same exact look. In fact, he had seen the look so many times, he had lost count. "Fourth master, please place a hand on the saint stone." De Shu smiled. The saint stone is a special rock that could measure the amount of saint force within a person's body. Within the large Tianyuan continent, there are many different items that could measure one's personal strength. The saint stone used colors to represent a person's strength: red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple. Having the stone flash red meant that the person was still below a saint in strength, while an orange color meant that the person was at the same level as a saint. The yellow color represents a great saint and blue meant the person was an earth saint master. Lastly, a purple color represented a heaven saint master. Any rank higher than the heaven saint master like a saint ruler, saint king, and saint emperor could not be ranked by the saint stone. Hearing De Shu, Jian Chen focused back on the task and extended his hand onto the white stone called the saint rock. At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on the saint rock. They all stood up in anticipation, anxious to find out how strong the gifted Jian Chen would be. When Jian Chen placed his hand on the saint rock, De Shu extended his own arm to activate the saint rock through seemingly magical means. Immediately, Jian Chen could only feel an odd type of energy pulse from the stone and into his arm. While the energy felt odd to him, it entered his body quite gently where it slowly circulated around before pulsing back out from his body and into the stone. De Shu stared at the saint rock for any change in color, but after a short period of time, there was no change at all. Not even a single shade of color other than its original one could be seen. How is this possible? The saint rock doesn't even have a sliver of color reflected. De Shu couldn't help but cry out in alarm. The smile that had been on his face slowly disappeared from his face and turned to look at Jian Chen's own face with an odd expression. Neither of the two could believe what was going on. Taking note of the look of shock on De Shu's face and the still white saint rock, everyone subconsciously came to a realization. Their faces couldn't help but slowly change as they looked at their neighbors, then back at the front. Blinking once, the look of abject bewilderment was noticeable on most people's face, while some people even sighed with looks of pity. Changyangba's face grew ugly while even Bai Yuntian's face drained of color. Neither of the two looked as if they were refusing to believe the news. De Shu gave a gulp. This result was unbelievable to even him. Immediately starting up the Saint Rock again, he had hoped that it was a mistake the first time. But alas, the tree had borne no fruit, and the rock no color. Again, this result was inconceivable to De Shu. The fourth master had been called a gifted genius since he was born, but it had seemed as if he was nothing more than a cripple who couldn't cultivate or use Saint Force at all. De Shu couldn't help but give a disappointed sigh as he looked at the silent Jian Chen with a complicated look. He turned around to face Changyangba, clan leader. The results are in. The fourth master is unable to cultivate the Saint Force in any way. Upon hearing this declaration, Bai Yuntian's face grew even more pale to the point that it was almost devoid of color. Looking at Jian Chen dumbfounded, she muttered, that's not possible. How can Xiang'er be a cripple? Right as she finished, her eyes rolled to the back of her head and crumpled down to the ground from her chair. For her son that was widely regarded as a genius to suddenly be found as a cripple, she couldn't handle this shocking news at all. No mother in the continent would be able to, let alone a member of a very prestigious clan. As everyone that had gathered around heard the results, they all gasped and looked at Jian Chen with pity and disappointment. Jian Chen's Ensu Feng Yen and Ling Long on the other hand, let loose a breath of air. Seeing the mother and son's unfortunate situation, the two aunts couldn't help but rejoice silently to themselves. Ah, fourth sister. Fourth sister, what's wrong? Fourth sister, please wake up. Fourth sister, please wake up. Rushing to her side, Bai Yushuang anxiously tried to awaken the unconscious Bai Yuntian, but to no avail. Hearing Bai Yushuang's frantic yells, Changyangba immediately bounded over to Bai Yuntian and began to cry out, Shuang bring Yun to her bed. Even Jian Chen had rushed to his mother's side without paying attention to anyone else. His right hand was already pressed against his mother's wrist to check for her pulse. It took a few precious seconds, but he had eventually confirmed that his mother was in no immediate danger. Jian Chen looked at his disappointed father amongst the crowd, and even he had felt helpless secretly. With a small sigh, he followed Bai Yushuang who was carrying his mother out of the hall. Ai. Watching Jian Chen leave, Changyangba's face clearly had a look of extreme disappointment. He had placed high hopes on Jian Chen before, but as the expectations were very high, so was the later disappointment. With this result in the end, his fourth son Xiang Tian was merely a cripple. Clan head, don't pay too much attention to this. Although the fourth master cannot cultivate Saint Force, it doesn't mean he isn't a genius in other aspects or fields. A young male clan member tried to console him. Changyangba waved his hand and said sadly, let's not mention this topic anymore. Everyone is dismissed. Finishing his sentence, Changyangba stood up to leave the hall. Although he had acknowledged the fact that Jian Chen could be a genius in the other fields as said earlier, but Saint Force was the most important factor in this world. After all, strength is what mattered in the end. The fact that the fourth son of the leader of the Changyang clan was a cripple spread throughout the Changyang mansion like wildfire. Some people regarded this new piece of information with joy while others were grievous. One thing was sure however, Xiang'er's status in the clan would rapidly drop after this affair. In a wide spacious room, Jian Chen sat quietly by the bedside. His tranquil face was dipped downwards and what he was thinking about was unknown to everyone else. His mother Bai Yuntian still hadn't woke up, her eyes were still shut as she laid in bed. Aside from Jian Chen and some servant girls, only his third aunt Bai Yushuang and his second sister Changyang Mingyue were in the room. Chapter 8. Disaster. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Looking at the mute Jian Chen, Changyang Mingyue blinked a few times. She walked up to Jian Chen's shoulder and said, "Fourth brother, please don't feel too sad. If anyone in the future bullies you, tell your older sister and I'll beat them up. Changyang Mingyue thought that Jian Chen was feeling sad because he was a cripple and that he didn't have the ability to defend himself from anyone that would mock him. Hearing what Mingyue had said, Jian Chen couldn't help but lift his head to smile at Changyang Mingyue. Don't worry, second sister, I won't be an easy person to bully. Only Jian Chen understood that it wasn't because he was unable to cultivate Saint Force, it was due to the fact that he had been incorporating the Saint Force into the cells of his body. Because of this, his body was essentially an empty shell, with no Saint Force remaining in his body. If he hadn't used this method, then today's Saint test would have had a different result. It was unfortunate that Jian Chen wouldn't be able to explain this situation to people. Even if he wanted to, he wouldn't be able to explain how he came about this method. Not to mention that if he were to talk about Azulite sword law, then Jian Chen feared that the history of both the technique and himself would become a great problem. Although Jian Chen had understood that because of this situation, his status within the clan had taken a major hit. He didn't care at all for that, however, and had secretly wanted a situation like this to happen. If things had progressed as well as they did just now, then in the future he would be able to leave the Changyang mansion with more ease. If he had still been stuck with the label of a genius, then departing from the mansion would not be as easy. At the very least, as long as he didn't have their approval, they would ignore his trips in and out of the mansion. Xiang'er! Xiang'er! A voice came calling out from the bed. Jian Chen's mother had finally awakened. Right after hearing his mother call his name, Jian Chen's mind was jolted back to consciousness. He immediately turned around to look at her. Mother, your son is here, everything is fine now. Bai Yuntian had a complicated look on her face as she gasped, your mother is fine, but Xiang'er.ai. As she spoke, a myriad of expressions were shown on her face ranging from sorrow, sadness, and even pain. Fourth sister, please don't trouble yourself too much. Xiang Tian has been highly intelligent since birth, so although it is regretful that he cannot cultivate Saint Force, but in my opinion, Xiang Tian is not so simple. After all, no child in the clan is smarter than him. Bai Yuxuan was trying to console the still grievous Bai Yuntian. Bai Yuntian lifted her head slowly. I had already understood this fact. Looking at Jian Chen, she gently started to caress the back of Jian Chen's head. Xiang'er, don't feel sad, what your second aunt said is correct. Although you cannot cultivate Saint Force, you are still a very intelligent child, we still don't know in what areas you would be best suited for. Jian Chen hesitated when he heard his mother speak. Even though his mother was awake, he was not feeling all that much better. In reality, he had really wanted to tell the truth to the people there, his mother most definitely. He wanted to say that he wasn't a cripple that couldn't cultivate Saint Force, but Jian Chen chose to endure this. Mother, don't worry, your son won't disappoint you. Compared to his mother's love for him, Jian Chen had utterly cherished it. He would later spend the whole day by the bedside of his mother before leaving at night. Periodically, Changyang Ba would drop in to see his wife, but he would then leave just as quickly as he came. When it came to Jian Chen, Changyang Ba's attitude towards him had been completely different these days in comparison to before. With each passing time, Jian Chen could clearly see that Changyang Ba had been treating Jian Chen with a colder expression. In the blink of an eye, 4 years had passed after Jian Chen's Saint test. During the days that he wasn't busy, Jian Chen would shut himself in his room to continue training. The amount of training he needed nowadays was considerably longer than in the past, so much longer, that sometimes, Jian Chen would not be seen walking out of his room for the entire day. In those 4 years, Jian Chen's status in the clan had dropped immensely as expected. Changyang Ba had been treating him more coldly now, and no one had ever bothered to take the initiative to seek him out first. It was vastly different than from his mother who saw him every day. Her love had never wavered at all. Early one day, Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes from his crossed-legged position once more to show that he had finished last night's training. Immediately extending both arms palm side up, a light round ball gradually came into view. He flipped the beautiful ball into the air from his hands and watched it fall towards the ground, where it came to a stop as both his hands were focused on it. Hearing only the slightest of sounds, Jian Chen clapped his tiny hands together as if they were two steel plates and started to do push-ups on the normally soft ground, occasionally bringing his head so close to the ground he could kiss it, and even left an imprint on the ground afterwards. Looking at his own hard work with a joyous smile, Jian Chen laughed. Half a year after the Saint test, Jian Chen had already finished the cultivation stage of the first principle of the Azulite Sword Law. This meant that he officially started to cultivate the Saint force without having to assimilate it into his own body. His cultivation rate was extremely fast, so fast that in the span of a just few years, he had already reached an astounding result. As he was now, he could use the Saint force that was stored inside of him to reinforce his hands so that they could break through stone without effort. Early in the morning, Jian Chen walked out of his room to wander around the Changyang mansion alone. However, a group of patrolmen were walking around at the time spotted him, with each member having a different expression on their faces. Some had a mocking look, while some looked at him with disdain, but very few looked at him with pity. The fact that Jian Chen was a cultivation cripple had long ceased to be a secret within the clan, and so even the guards that patrolled the mansion had started to look at him differently. But Jian Chen turned a blind eye towards them. His stomach was growling from hunger, and so Jian Chen had decided with a small sigh that it was time to head towards the kitchens. It had been a long time since he had accompanied his mother to the dining halls to eat together. Nowadays, he would go to the kitchens himself to eat breakfast, and would only eat lunch and dinner together with his mother and some of his aunts. When Jian Chen reached the kitchens, over 100 servants could be seen running about. The kitchen was a tremendous mess due to the stove where it stood like a smoking hot steamer basket. Oh! Isn't this the fourth master? The fourth master has come to the kitchens. Ai, this isn't the proper place for someone as pampered as fourth master to be. The kitchens are for lowly servants like us, so why have you come here? The teasing voice of a 20-year-old servant came calling out. Judging by his odd tone of voice, it was clear to tell that he was mocking Jian Chen. Another voice continued straight after the first servant, if my guess is correct, then fourth master came down to the kitchens to get some steamed buns. But that's weird, why isn't the fourth master eating at the dining halls with the rest of the clan? Has he wronged himself and so wanted to eat the steamed buns from the kitchens? These steamed buns are only fit for us lowly servants and guards to eat, however. Another 30-year-old servant continued to sneer at Jian Chen. Upon hearing the two people talk, the other servants in the kitchen all started to look at the spectacle. Both of these servants had the support of some of the superiors. For example, the 20-year-old servant was not only introduced by Changyang Ba's first wife Ling Long, but he was also the servant of Jian Chen's eldest aunt. Rumors had it that Ling Long had hired him because he was a family relative, but because his body had lacked the power, he could only work in the kitchens. As for the 30-year-old servant that spoke second, his brother is the group leader of the Changyang Mansion guards. Hearing the two servants mock him, Jian Chen could only narrow his eyes slightly as anger flashed through his eyes. Biting back any sort of rebuke, he moved towards the giant steamer basket and held his hand out to take off the lid of it before all of a sudden, two giants' hands came out of nowhere and quickly moved the steamer basket away from him. I should really bring these steamed buns to the guards right away, our honored guards haven't yet eaten breakfast yet after all. Whisking away the basket, the servant muttered out loud as he exited from the kitchens, what a crying shame, the fourth lady gave birth to a good-for-nothing cripple. At that last remark, Jian Chen went rigid. At last, the anger within his heart had finally broke free. Without saying a word, his legs blurred as both of his legs stamped across the ground. Reaching the servant with the steamer basket within a few seconds, he raised one fist and brought it down onto the servant's back. Bang! Completely caught off guard, the servant carrying the steamer basket was sent staggering to the ground. The basket he had carried dropped to the floor, and with a great big smash, the nice and plump steamed buns scattered across the floor in 4 directions one by one. Everyone in the kitchen stared at this unforeseen event with a shocked look. Seeing where Jian Chen now stood, no one could believe what they saw. No one had saw clearly how fast or even when Jian Chen had moved. For the 7-year-old fourth master to have brought down the 30-year-old servant with a single punch to his knees, it was inconceivable. Although the steamer basket had been dropped and the food wasted, everyone was still amazed by this show in front of them. Ha ha ha, brother Chiu Er Lao, you really amaze me. Even though you are an expert that has reached the 3rd layer of Saint Force, yet you were knocked down by the fist of a little child. Did you waste too much energy with a girl last night to become this weak? Looking at the servant at the ground, the first servant who had made fun of Jian Chen was now roaring with laughter at the second servant. The servant called Chiu Er crawled up from the ground, his eyes burning with fury towards Jian Chen as the words of his younger servant friend reached his ears. For a 7-year-old child to push him down to the ground, especially a child that was a cripple in the ways of cultivation, this was the ultimate form of humiliation and shame for him. After all, although he had not yet condensed his Saint Force into a Saint weapon, he was still a practitioner that had reached a level far above that of the cripple. Shaking his head in rage, Chiu Er had forgotten in that moment that Jian Chen still held the status of being the 4th master. With a snarl, he jumped towards where Jian Chen stood and sent a punch towards his stomach. Watching Chiu Er's fist get closer, Jian Chen had a look of disdain on his face. To him, this punch that he had thrown out was full of mistakes and openings, and so he dodged by moving to the side very slightly to avoid the fist. Throwing himself forward, Jian Chen's right leg arced in a beautiful way and kicked Chiu Er firmly on the nose. Ah! Chiu Er let loose a blood-curdling scream as he clasped his bloody nose with his hands. Even then, a small steady flow of blood leaked through his hands. Jian Chen's leg had not been merciful, Chiu Er's nose had been kicked in and broke. The acute pain in his face had already drained it of color. Chapter 9. Revealed Strength. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chiu Er looked at Jian Chen with obvious anger in his eyes, making it seem as if he was a wild beast that wanted to take Jian Chen down. You little bastard, I'm going to teach you a lesson today. Chiu Er roared angrily. He dashed towards Jian Chen and sent a kick towards his head. The kick was fairly fast, and if it connected, it definitely would not result in a small wound for any normal person. But since Jian Chen was still in the body of a child, a direct hit from such a strong kick had a high chance of killing him. Assessing the strength of Chiu Er's kick, the 20-year-old servant's face suddenly lost its humorous expression and became pale. Shouting out in alarm, he cried, "Brother Chiu Er, stop!" Jian Chen was still the 4th master as well as the son of Changyang Ba. Despite being a cripple, he still had some degree of respect around the Changyang mansion. It was barely okay to mock him, but to raise a hand against the 4th master was unforgivable. Even if they had the support of any of the elders, they would still incur a terrible punishment upon them. Seeing the intensity of Chiu Er's kick, Jian Chen's face changed as well. His eyes grew cold as he leaned to the side again. Calmly staying outside the reach of Chiu Er's kick, he didn't retreat. Instead, Jian Chen rapidly approached Chiu Er's body. He placed his arm on Chiu Er's still outstretched thigh while the other hand went to the other thigh. With a low growl, Jian Chen released all of the Saint Force he had stored in his body into his waist and surprisingly lifted the over 100-pound Chiu Er above his tiny body. Raising Chiu Er's body, Jian Chen didn't bother giving him time to retaliate. Both his legs began to move across the ground as Jian Chen threw the heavy body of Chiu Er forward. Chiu Er's body flew over 5 meters before slamming into a table meant for cutting vegetables. Coincidentally, underneath his falling body was a stack of iron skewers, falling down onto that would make him resemble a bizarre human porcupine. Chiu Er fell on top of the skewers, and at least an inch of skin had been pierced through by them. Immediately, Chiu Er screamed in pain as the skin of his body was distorted and the pain in his nose was still piercing through his mind. Every servant in the kitchen suddenly came to a standstill from the unbelievable event they had just watched. A single 7-year-old not only fought back against a heavyweight person like Chiu Er, but he even defeated that person, who had reached the third layer of Saint Force. If news of this got out, no one in the Changyang clan would be able to believe it. Jian Chen looked at Chiu Er's suffering with cold eyes while making a mocking face at him. He didn't say anything, and decided to leave the kitchen instead, without taking even a single steamed bun with him. After exiting the kitchens, Jian Chen slowly exhaled. He didn't think that even the servants in the kitchens would begin to mock the fourth master. Throwing away the depression from his heart, Jian Chen began to stroll around the Changyang mansion once more. With the mansion being so vast, Jian Chen had never once seen the entirety of it. Even the scenery around the place was nice to look at, as gardens surrounded every inch of the outside yards. There were many lakes as well as flower gardens that had very rare specimens that could not be seen anywhere else, and they carried a sweet fragrance. As the fourth master of the Changyang clan, Jian Chen was free to wander wherever he wanted. As he wandered to and fro, he would come across important roadways and buildings that had many experts concealed everywhere. When he saw those experts, however, he had decided to think no more about it. After all, he knew that the Changyang clan is one of the 4 great clans of Lore City. Lore City was a first-class city, so the title of being a big clan was a prestigious one. As he walked, he had unconsciously came to the middle of a calm flower garden. Jian Chen had not noticed that his third brother Changyang Ku had been carrying a wooden axe as he trained within the same flower garden. However, in the eyes of a battle-hardened Jian Chen, it looked as if Changyang Ku was just recklessly swinging the axe around with no particular style in mind at all. Although Jian Chen had studied the way of the sword in the past world, he had studied many different axe-wielding experts and how they fought. So even Jian Chen was familiar with how one should use an axe, but the way Changyang Ku was handling it, Jian Chen was speechless. How could this be considered training? Just as Jian Chen was about to turn around to leave, Changyang Ku noticed him out of the corner of his eye. Slowly ceasing his movements, Changyang Ku's face started to show signs of ill intent as he smiled. "Fourth brother, come on over, your third brother has some candy for you to eat." Changyang Ku cried out to Jian Chen. Hearing Changyang Ku's words, Jian Chen nearly tripped down onto the ground in disbelief. Secretly thinking to himself, he thought, even a 7-year-old wouldn't fall for such a line. However, Jian had forgot to account for that aside from the experiences of his past world, he was still no better than a 7-year-old child. But he paid no mind to the words of Changyang Ku and continued to keep on walking without even turning his head back. Seeing that Jian Chen was getting farther and farther away, Changyang Ku began to get angry. Throwing the wooden axe in his hands to the ground, he dashed towards Jian Chen and eventually caught up to him. "Fourth brother, did you not hear me just now?" Changyang Ku blocked Jian Chen's path like a cork in a bottle, his face red with anger as he stared at Jian Chen. "Is something wrong?" Jian Chen looked at Changyang Ku with a calm gaze while implying a hint of coldness in his question. Jian Chen did not harbor any good sentiments towards his third brother. In the past 2 years, Changyang Ku would always look for some way to bully Jian Chen, and ever since the news of Jian Chen being a cripple, his actions became much more severe. If it wasn't for the fact that Jian Chen rarely went outside, the amount of times Changyang Ku bullied Jian Chen would have been increased tenfold. However, every time he had tried to bully Jian Chen, it would always result in failure, and sometimes Jian Chen would also find a way to bully him back. This had created a sense of resentment within Changyang Ku's heart which made him seek revenge even more. "Fourth brother, come accompany your third brother in practicing some martial arts." While talking, Changyang Ku had already started dragging Jian Chen towards the place where he practiced and did not give Jian Chen a chance to respond. Changyang Ku was actually very excited at the moment, for although he was not a match for Jian Chen when comparing their intelligence, he did not think he would be weaker than Jian Chen in terms of strength. After all, his fourth brother was a cripple in terms of martial cultivation and could not even cultivate any saint force. In Changyang Ku's mind, this was the perfect opportunity to exact his revenge. Not long after Jian Chen had been forcefully dragged by Chang Yongku to where he was practicing his martial arts, Chang Yongku picked up the wooden axe he had thrown to the side earlier and then said to Jian Chen, "Third brother, are you ready? I am going to start attacking now." Seeing Chang Yongku's gentle smile, Jian Chen let a hint of playfulness appear within his eyes. Holding both of his palms in a clueless manner, he asked, "Third brother, you have a weapon in your hands, don't tell me you want me to fight against you bare-handed." Hearing his brother talk, Chang Yongku looked distracted for a second. Looking at the wooden axe in his own hands, he hesitated only for a second before tossing it towards Jian Chen, as he said, "Then I shall give you the axe, fourth brother, and I will be the one that will fight bare-handed." Although the axe was wooden, it was still 10 pounds. Even for a 10-year-old child, swinging this around would prove to be difficult. Chang Yongku had thought of this and threw it towards Jian Chen for this reason. He wanted to make Jian Chen humiliate himself while he would look like the gracious one. Jian Chen took the wooden axe in front of him and started to inspect it. The axe was very crudely made, only the shape of the axe was there, while the blade of it was almost non-existent. Even if he were to try to chop at a person, it would not cause significant harm. At the very most, the axe would only leave behind a sore bruise. Seeing Jian Chen hold up the 10-pound axe with ease, Chang Yongku's eyes revealed a trace of shock. He had not been expecting this change of events. Jian Chen looked at Chang Yongku and gave a faint laugh, "Third brother, perhaps you should use this axe instead." Right as he spoke, he tossed the axe back at Chang Yongku. Catching the axe he had only just thrown at Jian Chen, Chang Yongku began to feel suspicious. "Fourth brother, could it be you still wanted to fight me bare-handed?" Jian Chen began to laugh as he shook his head. Grabbing a nearby tree, he snapped off a branch 1 meter long. Shaving away the little twigs and leaves, Jian Chen was left with only a single branch. "This will be my weapon." Raising the branch, Jian Chen laughed gently. Chang Yongku looked at the tiny stick that could be quickly turned into chopsticks in Jian Chen's hand and laughed. He was no longer angry as the day that he would be able to beat Jian Chen with ease seemed to be getting closer and closer. The dream of being able to bully Jian Chen without taking any losses had finally come for Chang Yongku. This would make him extremely happy. Chang Yongku clasped onto the axe firmly, "Then fourth brother, you'd best be careful. Your third brother will begin to attack." Right after saying it, Chang Yongku immediately stormed towards Jian Chen with the axe held in both his hands before trying to bring it down onto Jian Chen. This axe wasn't able to inflict a fatal wound, so Chang Yongku didn't bother to hold back and swung with all his might. Jian Chen's legs crossed forward each other as he dodged the axe. Swinging his tree branch with frightening speed, the branch had suddenly become more frightening in power. Even Jian Chen's demeanor had changed abruptly. As he pressed forward, the normally safe branch became a deadly sword in his hands. Jian Chen was swinging the sword with unbelievable speed, leaving Chang Yongku with almost no room to counter when at last, the tree branch had already placed itself on Chang Yongku's throat. "Third brother, you've lost." With a playful banter, he returned the axe that Chang Yongku had dropped shortly in the middle of the match. Chang Yongku could only stare at the tree branch at his neck with disbelief flashing across his eyes. He had not seen the tree branch move at all. By the time his eyes had saw a sign of movement, the match had already finished. Still in shock, Chang Yongku shook his head. Grabbing the tree branch at his throat, he snapped it in two and cried out in disbelief, "That didn't count. It definitely didn't count. Fourth brother, you weren't fighting fair at all." Jian Chen laughed as he looked at the red-faced Chang Yongku. "Third brother, you don't even know if I was fighting fair or not," he said in a strange voice. That is. Chang Yongku scratched at his cheek and stammered as he tried to think of an excuse. In the end, he still couldn't accept the result and said, "Either way, that match just now didn't count. Let's fight one more time." Jian Chen gathered the pieces of the tree branch that Chang Yongku had snapped with a laugh. "Okay, let us fight one more time then." Without further ado, he walked 5 meters away from Changyang-ku. Chapter 10. High regards. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Both of Changyang-ku's hands clenched his axe tightly, as he attentively looked at Jian Chen. Thanks to the lesson he had just learned, he wouldn't dare to underestimate Jian Chen a second time, so in this round, Changyang-ku moved around carefully. Jian Chen began to laugh at Changyang-ku, causing him to scowl in confusion. "Third brother, can we start sparring now?" Changyang-ku tightly gripped his axe. This time, he used his saint force to help him. Once again he charged at Jian Chen, but this time he was much faster. Jian Chen casually waved around the less than half a meter long tree branch in his hands. He was feeling fantastic for some odd reason. It was almost as if the branch had some sort of secret connection with himself. At the same time, within Jian Chen's heart, he couldn't help but feel the same sensation he had in the previous world when he had been on the verge of death, where he could understand the amazing power of the realm of the sword god. During that moment, he had finally been able to control his sword with his spirit, and had sent it flying 100 meters straight through Dugu Qiubai's throat. Thinking of that moment, Jian Chen sprung into action, as the tree branch in his hand was sent flying towards Changyang-ku. Whoosh! Bending to Jian Chen's will, the tree branch looked as if it was alive, and flew from his hands. Flying at incredible speeds towards Changyang-ku, the tree branch was enveloped by a faint white glow of light. A strong yet acute amount of sword chi was emitted from the tree branch, making it look like a bolt of lightning. With a brilliant flash of light, the branch had already reached Changyang-ku's stomach. Immediately realizing the trajectory path, as well as the amount of sword chi on the tree branch, Jian Chen turned pale with fright. He frantically tried to stop the branch from reaching its destination. If the tree branch was not stopped, then it would have, without a doubt, pierced through Changyang-ku and killed him. Even if he wasn't immediately killed, Changyang-ku would still have suffered from a fatal wound, which would lead to a disaster for Jian Chen. Right as the branch reached Changyang-ku's stomach, it began to slow, but not before piercing into his stomach just by a small amount. Looking closer, the tree branch had merely penetrated through the skin, but if Jian Chen had been a tiniest bit slower with his command for it to stop, then Changyang-ku would have been left with the branch straight through his body. Such a thought was too horrible for Jian Chen to imagine. Wiping away the sweat on his forehead, Jian Chen noticed that there was still a thin line of his soul connected to the tree branch. Confirming once more with his soul that the branch had only pierced Changyang-ku's skin, Jian Chen let out a sigh of relief. Feeling the slight pain from his stomach, the somewhat plump Changyang-ku couldn't help but start to pale. When he looked down and saw the bloodstains on his stomach, his face changed drastically. A wail was heard as he started to cry, with teardrops falling in a never-ending stream down his cheeks as if his eyes were fountains. "BL blood that I'm bleeding. Wah, fourth brother, you hit me. Wah, mo mother, I'm going to tell my mother about this. Mother. Fourth brother hit me." Changyang-ku immediately transformed into a child who only knew how to cry. Throwing down his wooden axe, he fled from the garden, bawling non-stop. Changyang-ku was barely 10 years old after all, he had not yet matured enough to withstand an ordeal like this. Looking at the slowly fading away Changyang-ku, Jian Chen couldn't help but shake his head. As he walked out from the gardens by himself, he felt a small bit of fear in his heart. What type of strict punishment would he receive for this? What? Chang Bai, are you playing a joke on me? In a study room, the leader of the Changyang clan, Changyang Ba, stood up from his chair in surprise. Focusing his attention on the elder in front of him, Changyang Ba couldn't help but be amazed by what he had just heard. The elder that stood in front of Changyang Ba was the housekeeper of the Changyang clan, Chang Bai. Chang Bai nodded his head solemnly, "My lord, even I didn't believe this matter at first, but dozens of the kitchen servants all saw it clearly. The fourth master really did beat one of the servants, as well as lift up a servant who weighed 100 pounds more than him, before tossing him 5 meters away. The most important part is that this very same servant is of the third Saint Force layer." Hearing Chang Bai, Changyang Ba's eyes widened in awe from this piece of incredible news. Chang Bai looked at the clan leader, and after some hesitation, continued to say, "My lord, I also received more information about this, but the fourth master was recently involved in a spar with the third master. Using a single tree branch, the fourth master was able to injure the third master." What? Xiang'er and Ku'er fought, and Xiang'er was the victor. With each passing second, Changyang Ba's eyes widened more and more. That is correct, my lord. The fourth master had used only a tree branch while the third master was using a wooden axe. Chang Bai added. How is this possible? Changyang Ba flew from his chair once more. Xiang'er is unable to use the Saint Force, while Changyang Ku is 3 years older and is also at the third Saint Force layer. Combined with the fact that Ku'er practices martial arts every day, how was he not able to beat Xiang'er? Taking out a tree branch from within his robes, Chang Bai held it out for Changyang Ba to take. My lord, the fourth master had used this tree branch to beat the third master. Changyang Ba took the tree branch that was no thicker than his fingers. Inspecting it over, he noticed the tip of it had been dyed with blood. Changyang Ba focused onto the dried-up blood on the broken tip of the branch while concealing all sorts of emotions from his face. Chang Bai, is Ku'er fine? The third master is uninjured besides some broken skin. Chang Bai replied. Changyang Ba nodded his head slowly with a neutral face. Inspecting the tree branch even more closely, he started to grow more and more suspicious. Finally, he spoke. Chang Bai, this tree branch is nothing special. In addition, the tip is not sharp at all. Based on Xian Er's strength, it is impossible for a tree branch to injure Ku'er at all. Chang Bai nodded his head in agreement, his eye glistening with a single luster. My lord, I just had an outrageous thought. What if the fourth master is not a cripple unable to cultivate Saint Force? Seeing the fourth master's display of might today, perhaps the fourth master had already cultivated Saint Force to the 4th level. There would be no other way for the fourth master to beat the third master otherwise. Hearing Chang Bai, the clan leader's face grew bright with emotion. To treat his son who was regarded as a genius badly after being revealed as a cripple, this was Changyang Ba's biggest regret. Chang Bai, what you're saying is that Xiang'er is not only able to use Saint Force, but that he is actually a genius at it as well. Changyang Ba's voice began to tremble with emotion. For a 7-year-old to reach the 4th layer of Saint Force, this could only be accomplished by geniuses of the Tian Yuan continent. On average, by the time someone reached the 4th layer of Saint Force, they would be years old. TL note. Ross Se Chang Bai nodded his head. I have watched 4th master grow up since he was a child. He is an outstanding genius in my eyes, and I believe in him. I can tell that the 4th master will be able to surpass even me in the future. Changyang Ba started to tremble and shake as he listened, his eyes expressing rapt excitement and minor disbelief. Chang Bai continued to speak. Back when the 4th master was revealed to be a cripple unable to cultivate Saint Force, I had found it quite strange. I had always found this situation to be fishy, but I couldn't figure out exactly what was off until today. With the 4th master's 2 displays of strength today, I'm finally able to confirm my suspicions. The 4th master was never a cripple, but indeed a genius of cultivation. Changyang Ba deeply inhaled to calm down his increasing heart rate, but before he could say anything more, a clan's member came running in and said to him respectfully, My lord, the 3rd master has been injured. The 3rd lady wishes for the lord to come visit right away. I understand, you may leave. Changyang Ba waved his hand, dismissing the clan member indifferently. Yes, my lord. The clan member bowed respectfully before slowly exiting. Changyang Ba looked back at the housekeeper. Chang Bai, it would be best if we head on over while checking up on Xiang'er. He has been neglected for so long after all. After he had spoke, he immediately paused gravely. Chang Bai, the 2 servants that dared to bully Xiang'er in the kitchen, I'll leave it to you to drive them away from my mansion. Humph, those 2 lowly servants, to think that they could bully Changyang Ba's son without consequences. Chang Bai laughed briefly, "My lord, those two servants have already long since been driven off. Although one of them was introduced by the First Lady Ling Long, the other servant's older brother is the leader of one of the team captains of the patrol guards. But since they dared to bully the fourth master, they no longer have any reason to stay behind in this mansion. Otherwise, I would not dare to show face around the Changyang mansion ever again." In a largely decorated room, the recently injured Changyang Ku lay on the bed. With a pale face, he stared at the freshly bandaged wound on his stomach. Sitting at the edge of the bed was Changyang Ku's mother Yufeng Han, with a look of distress as she tended to her son. Not too far away, Jian Chen and his mother Bai Yuntian, as well as first aunt Ling Long, second aunt Bai Yushuang, and second sister Changyang Mingyue all stood around the bed. Yufeng Han looked back at Bai Yuntian with an angry look, "Fourth sister, your treasured son is getting more and more outrageous. To have assaulted my Ku'er with such a dangerous weapon, it's a good thing my Ku'er is very strong and didn't suffer a deadly wound. Otherwise, who knows how this might have gone." Jian Chen scowled as he listened to her, not accepting her words even a tiny bit. "This can't be blamed on me, it was third brother who had asked me to spar with him. A small injury like this is unavoidable. Besides, I was not using a dangerous weapon, but a tree branch. If anyone is to blame, then it is third brother's lack of skill." Yufeng Han's face went ashen at Jian Chen's remarks. What he had said made perfect sense and she could not refute them in any way. Just thinking about how she had been outspoken against by a mere child, an unholy rage rose up within her. Along with the words, "If anyone is to blame, then it is third brother's lack of skill," Yufeng Han's face went from green to white in rapid succession. These words meant that her son was no stronger than a cripple who could not even cultivate saint force at all. Hearing that Yufeng Han be beaten by a child, Bai Yushuang could not help but laugh merrily, while Ling Long sat there with an expressionless face.